Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of the Awesome Algo podcast. And today's guest is James Bailey. He is a chief operational officer from a company called SubQuery. And we're going to talk about SubQuery Network today, which is essentially a decentralized indexer service that works with different chains and simplifies development of decentralized applications by a great extent. And as always, as a preface for the episode, I did my due diligence by going over the code base of the project and trying some hands-on guides on it. And we will see how deep we will dive in regards to technical details. But I believe it would be nice to also cover it from a higher level standpoint, because there's a lot of interesting notes and details on there. And with that, I would like to start with you, James. If you could tell to myself and our listeners a little bit about yourself and your academic background and how you first got introduced into the field of engineering.
Yeah, thanks, Al. Thanks very much for having me on this podcast of yours. It's great to be here, and it's great to be talking to the communities in Algorand. Some background about me, I guess, to start with. Well, I think like many people in this industry, I started as a software developer many years ago. I studied software development at university and graduated there and went and worked in various software jobs. I kind of found my way into product management, and then where I am now is kind of leading the operations side of SubQuery. I kind of joined SubQuery initially about 2 years ago to lead their business development side, and which is kind of strange when people kind of ask about it, because it's like, what's a software engineer doing in business development? It's the wrong type of development, really, isn't it? But what you do find when you do product management is the way that product managers operate on this kind of idea of kind of figure out what the most value is and building products that provide that value. So when you're a product manager, you're always thinking about what products you can build that brings value to your customers. And it's actually not that different when you're assigned to sell those products to your customers, rather than internally trying to sell your team an idea, which is what product management's about, selling your team that we should invest in building this. Business development is about selling to another third party that they should invest in you. So it's a very similar approach of just coming forth with values. But anyway, that's a kind of a long way to describe that. I've had a bit of a weird, windy path to crypto. I've jumped around a lot of startups in the traditional industries as well as corporates. I feel like every 3 or 4 years, I forget how much I hate corporate life. And I make the ultimate error of going back into a corporate. It lasts about 10 months before I get churned out, because it's too slow. So
yeah, it could be draining experience long term.
It's nice if you want to take things slowly, but I think most of us in crypto, we like to run. So it's not really the place for us in the corporate world. But I've been involved with SubQuery for 2 years, and it's been a wonderful time here. SubQuery is not actually my first crypto job. I kind of had a job back in 2018 in the last boom, and that was for a messaging app many years ago. And it's interesting seeing the difference. There's a lot of cycles in crypto. And, I was involved in the last cycle before the one that's just finished, and kind of jumped out for a bit between the two and kind of came back, because I think what attracts me is, and this is probably the same for many other developers out there, is that as a software developer, there's only like 2 leading edges of software development. One of those is AI and the other one is crypto or blockchain. And I think it's what attracts everyone into the space, is that we're kind of building brand new stuff, and it's really cool. It's also got a lot of challenges, a lot of constraints, technical hurdles, but as well as process and kind of, customer hurdles. And those challenges will provide the environment that becomes quite interesting. So it attracts a lot of us into the space, which is great.
Interesting. There was a nice insight in the previous episode from Aaron from Headline Inc. and the fact that there's roughly around 200,000 engineers in total in the entire blockchain space right now. And then considering the fact how many projects within the blockchain space in general, it's just highly competitive space. And a lot of projects come to the same issue with, adoption. How do we do we ensure that our network is going to be the one? But I believe the recent tendencies are showing that the future is probably going to be a bet on cross-chain technologies and cooperation rather than competition.
That's right. But, back to your point around there's only so many thousand engineers in the space. It is very small still. And I still explain to my friends that I'm in blockchain and they go, whoa, what? It's kind of a bit of an odd one. But I think what's really surprising or concerning, however you think of it, is there may be thousands of engineers, but the number of like operations, marketing, customer success, like the non-technical people that we need to run these businesses, is even less so. It's in fact, it's critically short in those spaces. The number of people that compete over a very good marketing or BD person in crypto is huge. They might not be earning this kind of salaries that a Rust developer is. I was talking to a recruiter a while ago and they're saying that there were some salaries going around for 700K per year for a Rust developer, which is insane. But we're just as short in kind of the marketing and the BD side of things as well. And I think partly because crypto is looked at this as kind of perceived by many in those industries as this impenetrable technology crazed world or industry that is dominated by crypto bros and is somewhat toxic. And I think as part of all of our jobs in the space, because if we want to move on and grow up from being a project to being a business, we do need the non-developers to kind of lead us or give us experience or insights into things that we don't know as much as we do about developing the next protocol. So that's, I think, a big step that we need to take in the next cycle is making this industry more accessible for those types of people.
Yeah, exactly. And I believe the things that you're mentioning in regards to accessibility of the projects, like at the moment, it really feels like just being a byproduct of the fact that it's, a highly competitive space and people are trying to raise funds and money, and this implies stricter deadlines and you have to innovate and implement faster. But yeah, I certainly agree with your point on that things like accessibility and making it more available for anyone, because right now a lot of DeFi systems and protocols still imply a certain level of experience with these tools. But yeah, only time, I believe, will eventually slow down this whole sort of cycle of fast paced iterations, and we will start seeing great accessible tools and tools that are easily consumed by anyone. And
don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with this fast pace of development.
Yeah,
right?
certainly.
I think there's a point in the life cycle of any startup when they kind of transition to a scale up.
Yeah.
And that poses a whole nother set of challenges where you can't develop your way out of it. You may have the best technology, you may have the fastest protocol, you might have the most optimum bit of code.
But if your grandma can use it, then what's the point?
Exactly right. You don't have this community, if you don't have the accessibility, if you don't have people using it, if you don't have like streamlined operations so you can kind of get revenue from it, if you don't have good budgeting so you're not blowing through your budget, there's all these other, it's like the great filter of startups.
Yeah. And you mentioned something about Rust, and just an off-topic note, because it's a kind of a question I try to ask to a lot of guests who come from the engineering background. Any chance you can tell us a bit about your first programming language, or maybe your first favorite programming language that you got your hands on?
I think like many people in my generation, the first programming language was not Rust, Python, which was lovely at the time. Look, I've got that view on programming languages that yes, there are extremely eloquent languages and beautiful ones that are much faster and performant and superior in every way, like Rust. But unfortunately for humans, we are creatures of habit and familiarity. And so languages like JavaScript, they're not going anywhere. So there's a certain kind of appeal that when you write something in TypeScript or JavaScript, 99% of all coders around the world can understand it. And that goes back to the accessibility piece. So yeah, I've got some thoughts on these coding language, but like I don't think it matters as much as what you build with it and who your target is.
Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, it's just a tool that you need to choose wisely, depending on your requirements.
Exactly.
All right. So I think this was a great set of insights about your biography, and I believe the The main part of the episode today would be the discussion and deep dive around the SubQuery project. So I would like to slowly transition into that part. And if you could tell us a little bit about what SubQuery is, the company, and of course the network, the product of the company, and if there is any generic terminology that is specific to, Web3 space, I would really love for you to define the terminology as well, just to clear out any confusion in case there is some engineering folks listening to this who are not well versed with the Web3.
Yeah, so when I start with explaining what the problem that SubQuery solves, and we can kind of talk about what SubQuery is, because engineers might get this straight away, but it's one of those kind of next level down tools that the average person might not understand clearly. But blockchain, I guess, is an incredible technology that has the potential of revolutionizing our industry with it in a trustless and more equitable way. Okay. But blockchain does actually have a core weakness, and that weakness relates to the way it stores data. Blockchains store that data in a way that makes it terrible to access. So whenever you want to read off a blockchain and use that data that's already stored on the chain, it's in a very inefficient format. It's a terrible way to do it. And if we want to build amazing applications that are really intuitive, that allow the next billion users to enter blockchain and use it, we need to build applications that are easy to use and accessible. So they need to be able to retrieve data from a blockchain faster and more efficiently. So how is blockchain storing data? So imagine a book. And each book, this is a magic book. Every node runner around the world has a magic book. And every X seconds, a page is written to that book with a small amount of text explaining what's happened in the last, X seconds. So that's like a new block is added to the chain. So you can imagine blocks being added to the chain like pages being written to a book. But when you're retrieving data from a blockchain, you can kind of only read and analyze one page at a time. When you're looking at a book, you can only kind of scan one page at a time. And to answer simple questions like, what were the last 10 transactions I made? Or what were the last, what the last 10 owners of this NFT, especially historical questions like that, you can't really ask that book. You can't ask the book, like, what was the last 10 pages this character appeared on? Just so you can't ask blockchain that. It's not really designed to answer those questions. And the only way to do that right now is to read each and every page, to scan every block to look for the last 10 transactions, which takes a long time. It will take hours, depending on how long the chain is. So right now, application developers are forced to work this way with blockchain data. But we can't build these next generation of applications with tools like that. We need something better. And that is what SubQuery is designed to solve. SubQuery is an indexer. And what an indexer is essentially a process to scan, analyze, organize, and store information from the chain. So a SubQuery project is a self-contained project that will look through a blockchain and will pull off everything that you want to know about it and store it in a more performant way. And that more performant way is like as in a database, which is kind of the equivalent of like storing it in an Excel spreadsheet. You can like sort the spreadsheet, you can filter it, you can make pivot tables, you can do a lot more with it. We're taking data from this book and putting it into a spreadsheet. And we kind of build SubQuery as a tool. It's a very open tool, and we build it with 4 things in mind. First, it's got to be as fast as possible. Our solution is fast to set up, it's fast to configure, and it's fast to index. It will scan a blockchain in minutes. It can scan the Algorand blockchain, depending on what you're indexing, very quickly. And we have a lot of benefits that are baked in to optimize its scan speed, to make it as fast as possible and to save developers time when they build an application. Secondly, it's flexible. SubQuery is a kind of a scaffold for building your custom API. Your custom API is the way you retrieve data from the blockchain. And so you can index, transform, and query data to whatever you want. If you want to query just data related to your asset or your application, you can filter just to that. Thirdly, it's open. SubQuery is open. It's open source, meaning that you can do whatever you want from it. It's free forever. You can extend it. You can improve it. You can run it in your own environment. It's fine. And finally, it's universal. We've engineered it to work across many different layer ones. So we are currently working on different blockchains around the space, including Algorand. which means that if you're a developer building an Algorand that wants to expand your idea to other chains, which is quite popular these days, we can be there to help you. It's a universal infrastructure stack that brings communities together. So that's what some SubQuery is designed to solve. That's what it is in a high level way. And this is how we kind of design it to be better than the existing solutions.
Awesome. This is very interesting use case, and I believe you guys found a really nice application into it, because as mentioned in the beginning of the episode, it really is something that a lot of developers and just speaking from my own experience dealing with, for example, Algorand network. Algorand has I would say by default, out of the box, the Algorand indexer provides a really nice set of endpoints that allow you to do a lot, but it's still not a universal set of endpoints. You can just tailor it for your individual personal needs. And
it's not flexible.
And a lot of different
It indexes everything, and you kind of limited to what it indexes, which I guess it indexes everything, but doesn't index stuff specifically to your way. So, for example, if you're building an NFT marketplace and you just want to keep track of NFTs that have been minted, by your application, and you don't want to keep track of certain things about that, then the default Algorand indexer won't really help you with that.
Yeah.
Much more specific and much more tailored for customers.
And speaking on that note about Algorand, before we talk a little, because I'm really curious to hear your thoughts and notes on, what was the sort of prominent details or decision making behind, deciding to add Algorand as the next integration that Query would support. Before that, any chance you could also run down a little bit on the history of the different chains you guys integrated? What was the sort of decision making behind adding them? And I guess we could start with chains like Polkadot and
yeah. Well, we started in Polkadot. SubQuery began back in almost 2 years ago, slightly over 2 years ago now. And since then, we've come a long way. We started in Polkadot. Now, Polkadot, for those that don't know, is a chain built on a language called Substrate. You might have heard of Polkadot or Kusama. And it's one of those newer generation 3 blockchains, just like Algorand. It's got many parachains, which are like sub-chains that we also support. We then moved to Avalanche, which of course everyone knows about. Avalanche is an Ethereum-based chain, or has a kind of a very similar AVM. We then moved to Cosmos, which, like Polkadot, has got this multi-chain view, different Cosmos zones. That's non-ETH. That's another generation 3 blockchain. And then finally, we moved to Algorand. And it won't be the last. It wasn't the first, and it certainly won't be the last chain that we support. Essentially, our strategy is to look for advanced generation 3 blockchains. So if we plot the history of chains, you have generation 1, which is Bitcoin. Kind of Ethereum is what we call generation 2, where there's these smart contracts and the way you can build applications on them. And I like to classify generation 3 as anything that's proof of stake, because it's just a much more smarter way of doing things. But you also have a bit more benefits around performance. Now, what drew us to Algorand? There's a huge developer ecosystem in Algorand. And since we announced support, even just a couple of weeks ago, the number of teams reaching out to us is huge. The number of teams building amazing applications, DeFi, gaming, and many other different verticals in Algorand. We like that Algorand is very performant. There's lots of data on chain, a lot of transactions that are happening. It's designed to support very high TPS with very low fees, making it a perfect candidate for where you might want to build and adapt. And it's very similar to the kind of things we've done before, right? So it wasn't that hard to add support for. When we add support for Algorand, we allow you to index any different block. So you can just index the raw blocks, every single block you might want to do something. Or you can index specific transactions, and you can filter these transactions to look for transactions to or from a certain account, or you can look at transactions involving certain assets, or even transactions involving certain apps. So you can do a lot to kind of filter these different transactions down to what you need and what you want. And you're kind of free to index that data however you want. So yeah, there's a lot of small things. And I guess that's why we're keen to move to Algorand, because we quite like seeing the number of teams working on it. And, we have this hypothesis, which is rather than most teams will kind of go and support Ethereum, which again, Ethereum is a fantastic network, and with proof of stake upgrade very recently, it's broken new ground, and it's good not to have to explain away the environmental impacts of blockchains. I'm sick of the average people kind of harassing me about blockchains being incredibly environmentally inefficient.
Yeah,
I
there's
like to
lots
make
of stigmas around,
Yeah.
lots of stigmas around proof of work.
But, that's a lot of teams will go straight to like Ethereum. And we had this idea, which is skate to where the puck will be, which is try to add support in advance to where we think developers will be going to next. And we think developers are drawn to these kind of ecosystems, just like Algorand.
I see. I guess it would be nice to just briefly cover a little bit for the engineers out there on the architecture of the subquery. From my side, I could add a few notes that you guys have a wonderful set of guidelines called the Academy, and I had a brief exposure into it, and I mostly went over the Algorand integration part. And it's a very easy to set up tutorial. There is a scaffolding template that essentially expands the little starter project for you. All you need for it is essentially Node and Docker Compose, and you can run your own subquery indexer locally to play around with it. And I also like the way you guys utilize GraphQL. It's a very nice integration and usage there. So
that's very much by design, right? So I said at the start here that, making things accessible was really important. And so for us, making the documentation as clear and easy to follow as possible was really important. So we build a tool. That's all we build. We don't build the data sets that get indexed by a tool. We don't maintain data sets that many, apart from what our customers ask us to maintain. We just focus on building the tool, the indexer, and adding features to that tool. So for us, if our customers find it hard to understand or to use or to run the tool, it means that we've failed. We are only successful for as long as our customers decide to use our tool. So that's our entire focus. And that's why documentation and getting started guides, the ones you mentioned, are so critically important for teams like us. Without them, it becomes a lot harder to start using these tools. I don't know about you, but have you ever used some weird library somewhere and there's no documentation and it's just a pain in the ass to get started?
No, of course. I mean, it's I believe something that you stumble upon at least once in your lifetime if you deal with engineering.
So we've always made that promise that we'll never have that situation. And that's great to hear that you found documentation easy to do. In terms of the GraphQL, you're right. As a very conscious decision. And part of that is a flexible indexer. You can index whatever you want. And some customers of ours, when you run this indexer, it spins up 3 subcomponents. It spins up an indexer, which connects to a chain node and processes blocks and stores that data, the resulting data, in a Postgres database. And then it spins up a query service, which maps that Postgres database to a API, and that's a GraphQL API. Because the schema in your database is flexible. You can decide that yourself. So the GraphQL endpoint allows us to map any database schema to this API endpoint. In terms of, as I said before, right, it's open. So some customers who are familiar with GraphQL and quite like their REST APIs, which many people do, they've actually put a REST API server on top of our database, and that works fine as well.
Talking about the usage of subquery, there's one particular thing that Algorand indexer by default doesn't support, and I believe I'm pretty sure there will be teams in the Algorand ecosystem that might implement something like that would run on subquery. And I'm talking about an ability to pull all transactions within the group if you have the group ID. And for some reason it's currently not supported. Perhaps it would be added by the Algorand team, but this is something that some folks could essentially set up with a really low maintenance, low effort scenario. But let's proceed with...
That's exactly right. And you can also add on-chain requests while you're running this. So for example, if you import a transaction that you find interesting, you could do an on-chain query and then just retrieve everything around that. You could even if you, for example, want to index things whenever you receive a transaction and you want to get the current fiat value of that transaction, you could do an off-chain query to CoinGecko to get the current price of that asset at the time that was indexed and record that as well. So there's, it's flexible. That's the main thing. Whatever you want there.
And I'm curious if you could also talk a little bit about an overview of some, key features of the subquery network, and especially what makes it special. I believe there is in Algorand, at least in Algorand ecosystem, I don't think there is any products in that category. But would you say that it's something that, like, are there any other projects in other chains from which you may have taken some inspiration? Or I'm just curious on the novelty of the idea. Were there any other folks, perhaps in the Ethereum ecosystem, who were thinking about similar edge cases? Or yeah, would be
Yeah.
curious to hear your note on it.
Yeah, so there are three main products that we built at SubQuery. There's the SDK, this open source SDK that you can use to index, and you can run it yourself. And it's open source, it's written in TypeScript, it's very easy to use, the documentation's all there. You can run that yourself as you can, but like every other open source company, we have a revenue model where we provide a hosted service or a managed service. So you can give us your SubQuery project, and we will run that and maintain that for you in infrastructure in AWS. We'll run it for very high reliability. We'll give you a public endpoint. It's all kind of running in our infrastructure. It means that you can sleep easy knowing that you don't have to worry about running production servers, because if you've ever done production DevOps, you'll know that it's a pain in the ass. It's one of those things that you don't want to do if you have to. So that's a hosted service and SDK. One of the problems, I guess, with crypto, and this is a broader issue, which I'm sure everyone's familiar about, is that there are many centralized services that decentralized applications rely on. And it's kind of a dirty secret of the blockchain, is that we're still very early in the technology stack, and a lot of the stuff that we rely on is centralized, whether it's centralized infrastructure providers like Infura or Alchemy, or centralized data providers like SubQuery. And that's what brings us to build the network, is to resolve that issue. Now, the network is designed to be a way that you can run any SubQuery project from any of our chains in a decentralized way. And what that means is that you can give your written SubQuery project, and your SubQuery project is basically like a recipe. It's a recipe for how to index data. Take data from this chain, look for this bit information from it, process it according to this pipeline, and save it in this format. And you can give that recipe or that SubQuery project to any other indexer around the world who you don't know and you don't trust, you don't have to know, and they can index that data to you in a decentralized way. And you can have multiple people around the world doing this, so it's redundant, which ultimately provides you better performance, better uptime, better reliability, all the benefits of decentralization. So we're building that network, and that network is designed to facilitate that, where anyone can publish that project. People can index it. They can be indexers, and they can sell that data to consumers. Consumers can pay for that data using SubQuery tokens, and the indexers will be rewarded in SubQuery tokens. And then the average person that holds SubQuery tokens can also act as delegators. Now, you asked at the end, like, is there another provider doing this? There are many other indexes around different ecosystems, but some of them are quite similar. But the one big one that many tends to have heard about is called the Graph. Now, the Graph is huge on Ethereum and a few other ETH layer 2s. They're one of the kind of the big daddies of decentralized protocols out there. And they're a formidable team and an excellently run team. We started working 2 years ago while the Graph was there, because a lot of the teams were kind of asking us to build an indexer like the Graph on Polkadot. And the Graph, although they announced they support Polkadot, they never quite got there. So we kind of carried on and built that, and on the way have added support for these other networks like Algorand that doesn't have support from the Graph, because there are developers there that need indexing. We do it in a very similar way. I intentionally designed it to be quite similar, but there are some notable differences, and we try to add more features. Many of the differences relate to the network, the plan of our decentralized network. The Graph's network is running right now, and our network, we've just finished a test net. We had about 2,000 indexes in the test net, which is huge. Imagine having 2,000 validators in your test net. That's a large number of node runners. We've got a few differences, mainly around payment methods. Many other infrastructure providers and decentralized services, they rely on a transactional model of payment where you pay per request. And if you think around the world today, to all the internet services that you pay for, the music you listen to, the movies you watch, the TV you enjoy, how many of those service providers do you pay per music or song or TV episode? You know, like the last time we did it was kind of like the iTunes store. Everything these days is like subscription based, and there's a reason for that. There's like certainty on both sides how much it's going to cost. So I, as a consumer, know that it's going to cost me $19.95 a month. and the provider knows that this many consumers paying this many plans is going to earn a pretty steady revenue. So as a business, you can kind of plan around it. And so we think it's in order to kind of allow as many people to kind of migrate into this decentralized way, we need to provide these sorts of payment models that are familiar and that are comfortable for a business to adopt. And subscription-based pricing is one of those. So the SubQuery network will allow transactional pricing, obviously, but also it will allow you to say to an indexer, I'll buy up to 1 million requests from you per week. If you can give me that, and I'll pay you 20 SubQuery tokens per week for that. And there's certainty there. There's knowledge, there's certainty. Rather than paying 0.0005 SubQuery tokens per request, you kind of know how much it's going to cost you. So it's better for modeling. So there's the pieces on the payment side that we're doing. We've also taken a different hypothetical kind of approach here where we've built the network so it works with every chain that we support. So in our testnet, we had an Avalanche project, a Polkadot project, and a Cosmos project running side by side in our decentralized network. And we've done some other minor changes to remove a few participants like curators. So yeah, just some various differences, but there are just to be very clear here, the data industry is huge. So you look at the Goliaths of Web 2, the Facebook, Google, they have succeeded on the way that they can harness and utilize and collect data. And we think that Web 3 will be no different. The top companies will succeed in terms of how they manage data. We just want to build the best tool to help them with that. Now, it won't be used for spying on you, but it'll be used for building really cool apps, which is the difference between Web 2 and Web 3. But we believe ultimately that there'll be plenty of space because it's a problem that every team has, every app developer has. There'll be plenty of space for different providers like the Graph and SubQuery to operate in the same place.
I see. There is a very interesting point that you've mentioned in regards to the SubQuery token and the ways you guys incentivize it. I was curious if you also considered any scenarios, and perhaps it's something that is already available on SubQuery, but there could be a lot of cases when the developers building the APIs are not just interested in tailoring an indexer for their own needs, but perhaps providing some sub-generic API for a specific domain within their chain that they would like to sort of monetize, or just you don't really want to write an app for it, but a target group of users who might benefit from that API, so they write the subquery for it and they host it. Is it something that subquery currently supports? For example,
yeah, definitely. You don't have to be the consumer of the data to write a subquery project and build and run it or submit it to this network. I do imagine there'd be lots of people, and we already have a small team in our Discord of people that we go to a customer and they'll say, look, we need to build this data source. We don't have the expertise to do it in-house. Can we pay you? And we go and then pay our community to go as a bounty to go and build this data set for them. So I definitely imagine that will be the case. And there's a lot of data providers out there. When you talk about data indexes, a lot of people there's two subgenres of data indexes. There's open ones and flexible ones like us in the Graph, where it's you can index whatever the hell you want. And there are more standardized ones like Covalent, Chainalysis, and a few others that provide a common API of the key information for different chains. And they've shown that business model works. So I definitely imagine that some people will be able to go and use SubQuery to build competitors to them.
Also,
for a different
this is an amazing use case for it as well. This kind of reminded me this chain called the Singularity Net. I believe it's not really related to APIs, but they use blockchain to have a marketplace of AI services where people can basically pay a little subscription. And it's amazing that you guys do something similar with the provides the visibility to sort of monetize on the APIs that you write for some domain of users or domain of applications. And as we approach our final parts of this section too, is there any interesting cases of relying on any Algorand L1 features aside from things like Algot and Indexer, or it's mostly work around essentially operating with the existing indexer capabilities and trying to adjust it for the needs that user specifies in the mappings.
So we don't use the existing index. All we need to work as SubQuery is access to a reliable, high-performance archive node.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of shows the maturity of Algorand that there are 4 providers already that run these archives like RPC endpoints. Like PureStack's one of them. Algo Indexer by Algo Explorer is another one, and I can't recall the other 2. But it kind of shows the maturity of the ecosystem. Like I've been into other ones like Cosmos, where there's no kind of established enterprise level providers of these RPC archive nodes. We don't use Indexer. All we do is basically, when you design a SubQuery project, you like list out the different transaction types you want to subscribe to. We build a pre-computed cache of the location of all these transaction types. So we know, for example, that there's a block that includes a transaction from this address to this address here. And then your SubQuery project will find that out, and it will go and retrieve that entire block from the RPC endpoint and process that transaction from that block as designed. So we essentially build it as kind of atomically as possible, as self-contained as possible. So you can swap out the RPC endpoint and it will still work as well, same way. It's not dependent on anything apart from that RPC provider, and it works without relying on kind of third-party packages. Obviously, we bring some types in from Algorand, but like we don't bring in the indexer, the existing Algorand indexer at the moment.
I see. Awesome. Maybe, and I'm sure you're aware of that as well, but I believe if you host and run your own node, there's also an ability to, if you host your own indexer, basically, there's also an ability to just basically get direct access to the Postgres that powers the indexer. So there are applications of that as well, and people basically expand the existing APIs of that. But RPC is certainly a way to go in this case, I believe. All right. Perhaps there's any interesting, notable challenges that you guys faced from the engineering side of things when implementing the platform. Like when dealing with, I can imagine the complexity of just, getting familiar with different ecosystem, different ideologies of projects, and how do you guys deal with that? And are there any notable challenges that you faced over the past 2 years?
Yeah, as we add more chains, it does actually get quite confusing. Like you kind of have a call with someone from Polkadot in the morning, and then the next you have a call with someone from Algorand, and then Avalanche, and then Cosmos. And by the end of it, you're confused with chains of events or transactions or logs or whatever. You kind of the language kind of gets lost. When we build SubQuery, we build it to be unified. And another way that we express that is that the core way you build a SubQuery project is identical across these chains. So apart from an Algorand SubQuery project receiving an Algorand block, or a Cosmos SubQuery project receiving a Cosmos block, they're the same thing under the hood, really. As we've added our 4th chain, we now know quite well like what we have to edit for each chain that we support. And we have a pretty good process for how we go about learning about that chain. So we first kind of understand how data is. The main question is like, how is data expressed in your chain? And how do applications interact with that? In some chain, that's EVM-based smart contracts, and data is kind of expressed in logs and events. And Algorand, it's transactions. So it's just understanding how that data is kind of stored and expressed. That's kind of the first hard part. We also, when we first build it, we kind of reach out to 1 or 2 teams, and we've done this before, to kind of try it out with them in like a demo and a beta, because we don't know what we don't know. And I think it's really important to explain. There are known unknowns. This is when you know that you don't know something. So I don't know exactly what the best RPC provider is. I don't know exactly the roadmap, but I know that I don't know that. But in some cases, when you go to a new chain, there are unknown unknowns. You don't know that I'm completely missing this thing. I don't even know if I might be missing something. So reaching out to existing teams in the space, which we did in Algorand, and we were welcomed with open arms. It was really nice to join the ecosystem. Getting support from teams within the ecosystem, but also with foundations like, the Algorand Foundation was also very good as well.
Awesome. And I'm sure there would be people listening to this who are already familiar with SubQuery and curious to hear about, the next big thing happening and the next things happening in the future roadmap. Is there anything you can mention on that? What's essentially next for SubQuery? what are the next big challenge that you guys are trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so we're kind of got three main tactics right now that we're kind of operating under. The first one is we are very close to launching the SubQuery network. It's pretty much ready. Problem is right now is that the market's still a little bit rough. It's still a lot of people have lost a lot of value over the past 6 months. So right now isn't necessarily the best time to do a public sale, launch a token, and start a network. So we're just kind of adding a few more features, doing a bit more testing before we launch that network. And we are pretty much ready for as soon as the market starts to show signs of recovery. But we're biding our time. Patience is a good one here. In the meantime, though, it's around how do we build a better tool? How do we get more customers? By building a better tool, right? And the way that we've done that, we've kind of identified two main tactics. The first one is to add support for more and more chains. So growing the addressable market with support for other chains out there that may or may not have other indexes on them. So we're working on that. And we expect to add more chains as we go through this year. The second thing around that relates to performance. So we know that our customers are always asking us for the best indexer. If we don't build the best tool in the business, then our customers won't use us. So we're not losing sight of how we improve the performance of this, how we add more features, how we make indexing or re-indexing a lot faster. These are kind of key things that we're constantly adding features and iterating and building with. So that's kind of where we're at right now. It's improving the product, it's building the network, and it's adding more and more chains.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I would certainly agree with you with the current state of market. It's just too many things. We're in too many entropy in the world at the moment.
There's a lot of chaos in the world right now.
Yes, and this chaos is only expanding, unfortunately, every minute. On the closing notes, it's something that is sort of becoming a tradition on the podcast. I usually tend to ask the guests on advices that they could give to aspiring software engineers who would like to try their hands on blockchain development. And of course, in this case, we could just have a generic introduction into Web3 space in general. But are there any interesting advices that you may give to engineers who would try to get into Web3 space?
Yeah, I've got two. So the first one is for aspiring young engineers, I think, making into the space. You don't need to be an expert in Rust and Solidity. I think that's the biggest misconception, is that if you're going to be a blockchain developer, you need to know these really strange languages, and you need to kind of be able to be a master coder and these kind of things. There are a lot of blockchain teams that are building just regular UIs, right? Like React front ends, and just an understanding of the technology and an interest in the technology and understanding the constraints that the technology brings. You can be a pretty good blockchain developer working in a really hot blockchain team just by understanding these kind of common languages. So don't feel like you need to go and spend 3 years under a rock learning Solidity or Rust to get a job in a blockchain company. You can jump in and kind of learn on the job over time. And a lot of teams are kind of willing to let you learn on the job. As you said at the start, there are thousands of engineers, but we need thousands more. So anyone that's smart and can learn fast is the main kind of target for blockchain development teams out there. Now, the second bit of advice, and this one's for anyone that's interested in joining blockchain, and it goes back to that. That's what I was kind of saying at the start of this podcast, is that it's not just software developers that we need. If you are a talented marketer, customer success person, designer, product manager, accountant, there are so many jobs out there that we are not filling as fast as we should be, because it looks like it's an impenetrable developer-centric industry. Now, it kind of is in a way, but that is changing over time very slowly, and you can be part of that change. So same thing, if you're smart, if you learn on the job, if you can understand blockchain, if you're interested in blockchain, please get involved, get in touch. There are hundreds of jobs out there at the moment, if not thousands, and we need the best and brightest to kind of make blockchain a more popular, accessible product, not just a product or a domain for the smartest technical software engineers. Because right now it kind of is, when you think about it.
And maybe just as a final additional question on that, what do you think, and this could be, in the area of speculation, but I'm just curious on your thoughts on what, if we speak about the entire industry, what do you think is the biggest long-term threat to blockchain adoption?
Yeah, that's a good question, Al. I don't think it's regulation. I know a lot of people might say regulation. I think governments are kind of putting in place regulation now. They kind of see this as something that's going to keep going and remains as, and it's not about how you regulate to stop it. It's about how you regulate to kind of save people or have some kind of safety for consumers. Biggest threat, I think, for blockchain industry as a whole is if we don't manage to build it in a way that it works nicely with existing systems. I think we're at this phase right now where people are kind of interested in it because it's this new thing. But if we don't make it transition it from being what some people perceive as a gambling situation or an investment platform or just some weird technology that no one knows how to use, people might lose interest in it. VCs might lose hope in it, and the industry might struggle a lot more. So we're kind of on this big wave right now. We need to keep the focus on building applications where the next billion users can access it and use it, and building applications that solve real problems for real people around the world, even though they might not look like. And this is maybe another issue of blockchain, is that it's built by very affluent kind of people around the world, but the people that might benefit the most from blockchain are, the people that aren't as lucky as us.
The least technical.
The least technical, the least wealthy, and these, in certain nations where they're not served by a traditional financial system, banking system, they don't have any ability to, participate in the centralized systems like we can. And so if we don't kind of keep an eye on, if we don't kind of build for them, which is hard for us because we don't, it's hard to build a product for somebody you can't empathize with as much, then I think that's a threat to blockchain, Web3 as a whole.
Excellent remarks, James, on that. And with that, I would like to thank you for coming to the podcast. It's been a great pleasure talking about SubQuery. And just to mention to the listeners out there, James was one of the first who actually signed up through the forum on the Awesome Algo repository. I believe there was also a pull request that you opened to mention the SubQuery there. And for any creators out there who would like to talk about Web3 and perhaps specifically on Algorand as well, feel free to reach out over that form that is available on the awesomealgo.com. And with that,
make sure you list your product on that form as well. Make sure you list your product or your
make sure to list your application, because that's also important. Highlight your application. I
can tell you, after going into like 4 different ecosystems, you always look for an awesome X page in every ecosystem you go to, because that's like an instant kind of quick look into all the cool things happening.
Yeah. All right. So with that, James, I'm really excited to see what's coming next to SubQuery. I think it certainly sparked my own interest. I will probably do some little open source things with it, and we'll see. Maybe perhaps sometime in the future after the network launch and after the Algorand ecosystem grows a bit and we'll see more applications, we can have another episode and do it a bit more technical next time and some interesting details.
Awesome. Thanks, Al. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming.